Welcome to Marifado. Today we are doing something that we have never done before. Our first interview with a very interesting YouTuber. He's got a channel called ESOTERIC Thoughts. We will allow him to introduce himself by way of telling us why esoteric thoughts.
Thank you. So the reason for esoteric thoughts is, as a former Christian, I was brought up with a very literal way of thinking about the Bible. So from childhood, I was taught that the biblical stories were real, literal events. Only when I started to explore the deeper esoteric understanding of the text, I understood what was really going on, both with religion and the Bible, and its historic and present influence on Black people. So I tried to promote a deeper understanding of the Bible and religion, as most people don't have a clue what religion is actually really about and how it formed and how we actually got religion.
Thank you. What sort of impact are you looking at when you explore esoteric thoughts?
Well, primarily, I want to address and answer the questions that my previous church leaders refused to answer. So, growing up in a Christian church, there were many questions I had that I'd be prompted by my mum to go and discuss with the church leaders, the deacons and the pastors. And there was an unwillingness to answer my questions. In asking questions, you naturally expose the myth truths and the whitewashing that religion has actually done. So there's a lot of whitewashing that we take for granted when we accept and embrace religion, especially Christianity. And when you understand the historic impact of Christianity to melanin-dominated people, when you understand the things that we were told to believe and why we were told to believe them, it opens up a complete world of self-discovery that all Abrahamic religions tend to suppress. The channel tries to teach religious history as in its origins, in the text and its formation. When you understand religion and what it's done to Black people, you begin to claim back your history and look at things through melanin-dominated eyes and not how you were brainwashed to see things and believe things blindly.
Dealing now with primary sources, because the Bible is a secondary source, do you think many of the scholars that you have interviewed have dealt fairly with the aspect of melanin-dominant people's religion, history, as well as current affairs?
From the scholars that I personally have interviewed, there's an overwhelming consensus through origins of the biblical texts and the stories. They all tend to point to the historic Kemetic influence on religion presented as very differently from the original sources. Well, obviously they're seeing things still through European eyes. So there are naturally gaps in terms of not really understanding spirituality. So looking at the hard evidence, they're very good at pointing out the hard evidence in terms of the Kemetic sources and the on-the-ground research in Egypt. But there are still gaps in terms of what the significance and what the spiritual value of some of the ancient Egyptian texts is. And that shows very prominent when in having discussions, because historically very, very sound, spiritually there are definitely gaps.
What it therefore means is that the current affairs, in other words, the current understanding of many melanin-dominant human minds that frequent churches, mosques, and synagogues is kind of Europeanized.
Most definitely.
So what stops our own mentality to try to go beyond the barrier and say, okay, let's look at, since we have dismantled the colonization through wars of liberation, why are we not taking another step to say, let's look at religion?
I think historically, how we've been taught the Bible as very literal for hundreds and hundreds of years, that constant brainwashing of the literal interpretation of the Bible has stuck with us to the point where now we are very defensive. We get very defensive And
Yes.
we do argue that these things are very literal. Now, what's quite interesting, when I speak to white religious leaders, some of the priests and the bishops from multiple denominations, they actually don't defend the literal view. They believe in a more esoteric view. They believe a more practical application of the biblical text. Because of the way that we receive the biblical text, Black people still hold on to this literalism. There's a term called redemptive suffering, where through the oppression that we received, with the book of the Bible, we look for inspiration and redemptive freedom from the same book that was used to oppress us. So even getting over that mental block that this is a book that was used to enslave, we hold on to the book as a book of freedom. And by doing so, we look at things very literal. You know, God's going to burst through the clouds and redeem us and free us and take us to heaven. The mental blockage of looking at things any differently for Black people is a huge challenge.
Thank you. Now, which two videos from your channel, only two, have received a lot of viewership? And maybe why would you think people should go to those two videos and check them out?
So I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to mention three.
That's okay. That's good. That's good. Yeah.
So I have a video on Bible plagiarism. So this is Psalms 104 versus Hymn to the Aten. So this video focuses on the Kemetic source of where the Bible authors took and formed Psalms 104. I have a number of videos that discuss Bible plagiarism. The reason why I use plagiarism in particular is because these sources are not given any credit. And also, whilst there were many similar stories going through the ancient Near East at the time, some of these texts that were taken from Kemet do not show in any other civilization. So they were directly copied. These are direct copies from Kemet into the biblical text. Another video that seems to be very appealing to people, I talk about a story in the Bible. I'm not going to spoil it and go into too much detail, but I discuss the story in the Bible that this is a story that religious people generally tend not to want to discuss. It outlays a very horrific story about a brutal rape of a young lady who was then killed and her body was cut up into pieces. Now, this is a story that as a teenager, I remember asking the pastor to explain. Not only did he refuse to explain, he simply told me to go and pray. So the channel explores a lot of these stories that really stand out in the Bible that religious people do not like to explain. And the third one is the slave Bible. So I do a video on the slave Bible. So this is how the Church of England removed many parts of the Bible and created a special Bible for slaves. And it's quite shocking at the lengths that they went to control us. So when you hear people speaking about positive side of being able to read with the Bible, what people don't understand is that the version of the Bible that we were reading is not the same version that the slave owner was reading. So we were reading a different version of the Bible that was there to help to control us, to suppress our ability to rebel, and to give us this belief in redemptive suffering. So those are the three videos that seem to be drawing a lot of attention on the channel.
Very, very important videos. I think I'll just repeat them quickly. The first one is the sources on the Psalms 104, hymn to the Aten. I just want to highlight that Aten is, you can also write is Adon. So you say Adonai, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonai is in the Hebrew for God, and the God is Aten, the Son. So the hymn was copied, and there are no other sources other than the Kemetic sources. And the second one is the stories that are in the Bible, which are very unusual, like the rape. And the last one is the slave Bible. Quite literally an issue that should have been raised many years ago after emancipation, why that Bible was written and they highlighted, and the people made to be made aware about it. People don't know about these things, and we are showing the images of these videos, and we hope you go check out this and subscribe to this channel and listen to them and make your comments and share, and let's make this truth. This is the basis and the foundation for our liberation, mental liberation, and removing those blocks that are blocking us from developing and thinking clearly. The other thing is, maybe you have not been asked by a number of people, but from my perspective, if I was a Christian, I would say you are just castigating Christians.
Yeah, I do get a lot of criticism. I do get a lot of threats. I get threats from Black religious people like pastors. So on one hand, they hold the Bible, but on the other hand, they verbally threaten me. And no,
what a shame.
Yeah, yeah, but not surprising, because they don't attack the information. So they attack me, but they don't
ad hominem attack the messenger.
Ad hominem, correct. So I'm yet to have a discussion where they actually attack the information. I have reached out many times to have a dialogue with them on the channel. There's an unwillingness to do so. And the primary reason for that is once you start getting involved into the real origins of their beliefs. Now, remember, this is before 325 with Constantine. We're talking about going back even further, back to the Kemetic sources. They don't want to publicly admit where these sources come from. So in terms of the Roman influence, that's something that they are willing to deal with. But to explore going back thousands of years as to where there's a huge unwillingness to do so, because it opens a whole can of worms that they don't necessarily want to explain to their congregation.
Do you have any websites, WhatsApps, or social media presence that people can reach out to you and make their contribution in terms of comments, or they want to ask questions, or they might want to be interviewed also on your channel?
Most definitely. So predominantly use Facebook. So Esoteric Thoughts. There are 2 groups attached to Esoteric Thoughts.
Okay.
There's a group called Esoteric Thoughts, which is a public group that we can share information on. And there's also a private group that I've recently set up called Unslaved from Religion. The purpose of this group is for people to be a bit more personal, to share their experiences. I think the psychology of what religion has done, it's actually quite brutal. And people are, especially Black people in the church, they're actually quite unwilling to publicly come out and say what they believe. So this is a small network where people can privately ask questions, share information.
Oh yeah. All right. So we are just about to wrap up now. What do you consider as a general weakness found within Christian philosophy, Jewish philosophy, and Islamic philosophy?
I think across the 3 Abrahamic faiths, the primary weakness is a lack of evidence. You can walk into any museum now, the artifact tens of thousands of years old, see artifacts during the biblical period, but you will not see any prophets or any patriarch or any matriarch that has lived. So once again, it's the whole premise of religion is blind faith, and blind faith promotes delusion. So with everything else non-religious, they will expect you to have evidence or proof. But when it comes to the Bible, there's a complete lack of evidence. And it's actually quite strange that the acceptance of a lack of evidence to be covered with faith is a concept that I struggled with for years. And that's part of what led me onto my own journey. And I say to everybody, when you can, to visit a museum, visit a museum, and especially look at the artifacts of antiquities, and especially during the biblical period. And you'll see bones, skeletons, pottery, coffins, tombs, temples, living quarters, but none of what you'll see relates to anybody
to the Bible.
In the Bible.
Viewers and subscribers and listeners will consider your facts there. It's very, very interesting. I'm not going to be surprised in future if they dig up and say this is Moses, dig up, this is Abraham, because that they need to cover that gap, because there is no evidence, nothing. They say they lived in Egypt for 400 years, no trace. They went to Babylon, no trace. They're scattered all over. That's why they are lost tribes of Israel all over the world now. It's very, very interesting. It's a cooked up story.
Yeah.
And as you have said, the lack of evidence is very, very shocking indeed. So thank you very much, Esoteric Thoughts, for that. I hope people explore your channel and sit down with a cup of coffee and really munch over these ideas that are very powerful and liberating. We need think tanks like Esoteric Thoughts to boost our own base and become a race as it was in ancient times of thinkers, explorers, and people that are not scared of ideas. So from an esoteric thought and perspective, could you say a religion, including even our own African traditional religion or melanin dominant religion, needs a reformation, or we just have to ditch it or ditch them out?
Personally, I think the Abrahamic religions, I think we should ditch. The primary reason for that is these are poor copies of something that is real, that is original, and that's authentic. Why should we follow a poor imitation of something that we natively have? For the Abrahamic religions, I personally would be in favor of ditching it.
All right. So what are your final thoughts about esoteric thought and its future?
It's really a learning exercise for me. I'm continuing to learn daily and to interact with people from all walks of life. And as I learn and I'm able to produce content that people can learn, and primarily to answer and to tackle some of the troubling stories in the Bible that that the church don't want to tackle. And I think the sheer fact that they don't want to address these things should make everybody very curious as to why is there an unwillingness to address these stories.
Yeah.
And in looking at these stories and then looking at the biblical text and religion as a whole, it will set you on a journey of self-discovery. So for me, It's been very self-rewarding that I now appreciate our history. I appreciate African history. I appreciate the African influence on religion and on the Bible. And I can see things very, very differently than through European eyes that I've been brought up with, looking at things from a very Christian point of view. So simply from a self-discovery point of view, I encourage everybody to question things a lot more rather than take things for granted.
Thank you. Anyway, thank you. Everything that is good will have an ending anyway. So thank you so much for granting us this opportunity to chat and to interview you and ask you questions, and for your honest and earnestness to answer these questions. For our subscribers, viewers, and those that want to comment, Esoteric Thoughts is one of those channels that you should pay attention to and spend some time exploring, because it has a lot of informative, thought-provoking, and raw ideas, and scholars from all walks of life and races that have explored these issues that have infected and affected humanity for centuries and centuries, or maybe millennia. This picture by L.M. Dumizulu of Marifado saying, enjoy your life, have a good time, and May esoteric thoughts fare very well. Amen.